Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Pushing the Limits. Today's episode is going to be absolutely fascinating. I've been looking forward to having this gentleman on for quite a long time, studying his work. He's absolutely amazing. He's a luminary in this anti-aging longevity space and has been for decades. Author of the Aging Matters magazine. You run your own shops. Phil Micans, welcome to the show. Fantastic to have you here
Hello,
today.
Lisa. What a great show to be on and be with you. And we're probably at the exact opposites on planet Earth, but isn't it fantastic? You know, I'm in England, you're in New Zealand, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's fantastic to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to it too.
Oh, and you've got your blue light blocking glasses on because it's evening where you are. Very good. I approve. Phil, can you just give people a bit of a background? You know, yeah, you've been in this space for decades, but how did you get here? You know, how did you get to be where you are now?
Well, my personal story is not uncommon. There's two parts to it, basically, for me, in terms of my original interest when I was still a teenager. One was I always thought I was aging faster than my friends for various reasons, and I used to question why is this happening to me and not happening to my mates. Was one side of it, and then a bit later on, I had to visit one of my uncles in the hospital, and he was fully cognizant, but because of his age, they put him in a geriatric ward. Now, just very quickly to point out to people, the correct meaning of the word geriatric just means one thing. It means a person who's 65 or older. Doesn't mean they're incapacitated in any way.
I mean,
Yeah. So he had to be in there. I can't remember what he had now, some sort of leg problem, I think. So I used to spend quite a bit of time with him, you know, chatting and I don't know, playing chess and other things we did together while he was in the ward. But I noticed the other people, or some of the other people in the ward, and the state they were in, most of whom had regressed to when they were children. And it was an eye-opener for me as a young man to think, my goodness, is this the future we have? And on that point, I sometimes think that all schools should do two things to the children. One, take them at least one day to a prison, show them what life in a prison is like, because the message there being, you don't want to end up in one of these, do you? And the other one is take them to a geriatric ward with the same message. You don't want to end up in one of these, do you? So come on, help us fix this problem.
yes.
So with that in mind, and a bit later on, as I was going through school and then to college, etc., my eldest brother started a nutritional company. He'd actually met the founders of the Life Extension Foundation.
Wow.
In America, and that I'm talking now in the very early 80s. And he really picked this up and ran with it. And so he started that in the UK. And out from that, I ended up learning. I went off into that area. My first learnings were in the early 80s. Were in food and vitamin technology, which I think
degree.
Today we call nutrition, I think, today. And I've got a story there I'll tell you later on. And then after that, over the course of some years, I ended up doing pharmacy and I ended up doing biochemistry. So it was over a span of like 10 years. So I was working and then going back to university and then working and so on and so forth. But once this sort of came to the late 80s, early 90s, we realized that there needed to be access to a lot of these very exciting materials that we were learning about. And I'm now talking for those younger folks watching pre-internet, you know, and, it wasn't so easy to find stuff. You really did have to go down the library to find stuff. And so very early on, we recognized the need. Now I know every man and his dog's got one, but back in the 90s, we were one of the first online, if you will, internet pharmacies.
Wow.
But we weren't doing regular run-of-the-mill. We weren't interested in statins, antidepressants. We were doing things that we felt were aimed or were in demand for preventative and regenerative medicine.
Wow. Back then.
And so that's where IS, as we call the group now, the IS group, which stands for International Anti-Aging Systems, that's where we focus our efforts in numerous ways. So you know, we try very hard to get the information out to people, and also to help them get hold of certain materials if they require them. So,
and that's
I
what
like
you've
to
been, yeah.
as tool makers.
Tool makers, you're tool makers.
Yeah.
You're bringing the things that are at the cutting edge, and this is the thing. You're at the very cutting edge. You, with your magazine, you get to interview the leading people in the world on the current latest, what's happening in the research laboratories and what's going on. You've managed to get some of the greatest people interviewed there. How has that work been? You also run a summit. An anti-aging longevity summit, a profound summit, is it called? I think.
Today it's referred to as the Profound Health Summit.
Yep.
That's going to be, next one's taking place in May in England, May next year. And anyone, just type in profoundhealthsummit.com and you'll find it. So yeah, and over the years I've helped summits or conferences in different countries, including Monaco and Thailand and America.
We need your help.
No,
I'm organizing one. I need your help.
Even should have one. I think it's a good idea. Good idea. And you know, because it's all about networking, getting people together to share ideas and share resources, etc. And you know, I've been in my past, I've been extremely lucky. I mean, I had the honor, just as one example, of introducing to the stage, because I've done a lot of moderating in my time, the late great Professor Denham Harnham. Well, Denham Harnham was the originator of the free radical theory of aging, you know, back in the 50s.
Wow.
So I have met some of the greats, and I do have my own heroes, various doctors and authors and researchers in the field, some of which I'm very pleased to say are still very much with us.
Yes, and doing some wonderful work. And I definitely would like to, you know, get your insights on that, because it is a mission of mine to late next year to try to get a longevity conference going down here. Right. And I've already got the speakers sort of lined up, or many of the speakers. We'd love you to come down. Of course, you can ride your motorbike around the South Island while you're here. So that might be a draw card. But I think it's important, like New Zealand needs to be thrown into this space in a bigger way, where we sort of lagging behind in awareness. And it's really about getting the awareness of the space, the longevity, biohacking, anti-aging. You can live longer, better space. And the great things that are going on. So, you know, off here, we might have a chat about that a bit further.
There are obstacles, obviously. And to be honest with you, the biggest obstacle is regulation, because most people agree there is great science, there are great professional people, there's great protocols, even great products available today. But where's the space that will let you do it all? It doesn't exist. Some countries let you do this, some countries let you do that. And so there's been a big challenge to find a space that will do that. And I'd love to think that New Zealand could do it, although my personal belief has always been it will be a smaller country. I was in the Bahamas earlier in the year, and they're really motivated. Cyprus is really motivated. So it might be a smaller country that will end up being first to do it.
To open up these things. And it is like already we you know, without getting down to that rabbit hole, we've got issues, you know, and it's difficult for us to get access to. One of the real the missions that I've been on the last 8 years, trying to get things for my mum, the things that I know are going to be beneficial to her. And we've done miracles. I mean, the doctors are absolutely gobsmacked at what we've achieved, but I've been hamstrung often by the limitations of what I can actually get in. And I have other doctors who are prescribing stuff and we just can't get it in, you know, and it's frustrating as hell living here. But that's, you know, we just keep working on it. We'll just keep on the positive side of working towards
you have
getting
to
the science.
go looking deep into the laws, because the authorities will not tell you.
No, it's very and they don't know. They don't know about
A lot
these
of them
things.
don't know. No,
No,
that's
they
very
just
true.
don't know. Like these, like, and this is the one of the challenges, and we'll get off the subject in a second, but is that fact that they're still working out what to do with the internet, you know, let alone what to do with peptides or bioregulators or, you know, some of the cutting edge stuff that's happening. It's very hard to keep up with legislation when you've got science going on, and it's going to get worse because AI's now come, and we're going to even be speeding up the process by which we can have an understanding of a lot more things. But let's go and talk bioregulators. Now, this is a hot topic that I've been studying. I've been studying peptides. I'm in love with peptides. And I'm also starting to fall in love with bioregulators. Haven't got as much experience in the bioregulator space, but been studying what you've been talking about and many others in this area. And the cool thing about bioregulators is a lot of them are be able to be taken orally or nasal sprays, and they're a little bit more accessible in that sense of the word, or those supply chain issues we can get into later. But can you just give us a definition of what is a bioregulator peptide, and well, what is a peptide, and then what is a bioregulator peptide, and where does the science come and how does it work?
Yeah. Okay. Well, all the things that we might talk about today, whether it be peptides or proteins or even hormones, they're all made up of amino acids. And there's not so many of those, but that's what they are. And when two amino acids conjoin, that's the moment they become a peptide. So it's two or more amino acids. And then it starts to become, how long is this chain? So if it gets long enough, we might start calling them proteins. And even longer, we might start calling them various hormones. Just to give one example, human growth hormone is made up of 191 amino acids.
Wow.
Now that's a lot. Okay, that's a lot. And it means one fundamental thing. It means that if you want to get that into your body, you cannot take it orally. It has to be injected because it's just too unstable. However, as that chain gets smaller, other possibilities present themselves. Now, bioregulators are by definition very small chains of amino acids. They are, in fact, 2, 3, or 4 amino acids. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean to say that every single chain, 2, 3, 4 amino acid chain, is a bioregulator. There is another terminology to the word, and I'll get into that. And all of this work has been done, or principally has been done, by the St. Petersburg Institute of Biogerontology under the direction of Vladimir Kavinson, and it's more than 40 years old, because the original work used to be a Soviet military secret.
Anything military is interesting.
It is indeed, very much so, because those guys, and that's true today as it was then, are always able to do things that in the public domain we cannot. And that's true of whether it's the American military or British military, and probably the New Zealand military as well. I give one quick example. I'm guessing a lot of people out there have heard of a drug called modafinil, or modafinil, prefer to call it that. And it's been, some people refer to it as a smart drug. Doesn't really matter what you want to call it. But what it does, it's revolutionized the treatment of narcolepsy, which is sleeping in the daytime, and cataplexy, which is sudden fatigue. We don't need to perhaps go into the details of it, but it has, and a lot of people are aware of it. That used to be a French military secret.
Didn't know that.
So exactly. So they were given to their, like the French Foreign Legion when during the first Iraq War, the French Foreign Legion were taking modafinil. They were behind the enemy lines. They could stay alert and awake, and et cetera, et cetera. So just to point out, the military are always playing with things. They're always ahead of the game, et cetera.
Agree.
So what we're talking about now has a long history. It has loads of published information, most of which is now in English, as well as Russian, of course. And it's been on several markets, the Russian-speaking markets like Russia, like Kazakhstan, and yes, the Ukraine, for quite a few years. And the oral versions are food supplements. So as a result, they have been used by millions of people. And they've seen no serious side effects, okay, which is pretty remarkable.
Which is important.
Well. Very important. And I just want to point out that because they're so small, and because also they're nano-sized, the studies have been done, they are absorbed when taken orally.
That's
because a
amazing.
lot of people, oh, these peptides need to be injected, or at the very least as a nasal spray, or maybe sublingual if you're lucky. But no, these short chain, these very short chains can be absorbed through the stomach. So there's a lot of positives to them.
So why is it, you know, like I've had a couple of people on the podcast recently, like Ryan Smith and Natalie Nidham and Dr. Youth, Elizabeth Youth, talking peptides, and absolutely in love with peptides, but most, not all, but most of the peptides have to be taken subcutaneous injection, which puts a lot of people off, makes it more difficult. You know, how do I dose it? How do I do this? You have to be under the guidance of a medical professional. You know, highly recommend that for everything, by the way. But this is a little bit more of a difficult thing to do, right? And so when I came across the bioregulators, I'm like, this is too good to be true. I can get some of those benefits. And in fact, the bioregulators, if I understand correctly, go straight into the actual nucleus, the DNA of the nucleus.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Whereas the peptides are sort of more on in the mitochondrial, working on the mitochondria, working in the cell level, but this is actually going right in.
Absolutely. The Russians have incredible slides where you even have to put on 3D glasses to see the interaction with, if you will, the peptide key, the bioregulator key, and the specific DNA, because that's what they are. They're highly specific gene switches. And here's the thing, they're in food. These peptides are in food.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, a book has been written, here's a copy of it here, which is a scientific book. It's called Peptides in the Epigenetic Control of Aging.
Got it.
And to me, it was like a light bulb moment, because this is one of my little stories, forgive me. But when I was doing that food and vitamin course in London, many, many years ago, on the overhead projector, give you an idea how long ago it was, the lecturer put up a pie chart and he said, this is typically what you find in food. And there was X percentage of vitamins, X percentage of minerals, X percentage of oils. I prefer to call them oils than fats.
Agree.
Avoids confusion. But most of it was fiber, you see. And I remember on that very day having a thought, and my thought was, well, fiber must be pretty important, because more than 50% of food is fiber, and nature doesn't waste anything. And bear in mind, in 1981, nobody was really talking fiber then, right? Okay. So I had this thought, well, fiber could be a lot more important than we think it is. And my second thought was, well, maybe they've missed something. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to about 2009, 2010, when I first heard Professor Karamson lecture, which happened to be in Istanbul, and he talked about how these short chain peptides are in foods, how they act as very specific gene switches, and that how they were a major part in the epigenetics of food. To me, it was the light bulb moment.
Yeah.
It took me back to the classroom where I asked the question, have they missed something? And I think the answer to that is yes, they had missed the fact that foods contain peptides and they act as gene switches. So you are what you eat. You can't get more than, it can activate a gene or it can silence a gene. There's no middle ground.
Yeah, this is really, really important. So a gene switch. So we you know, I've studied genetics and epigenetics, and we are able, we inherit the genes from mum and dad, but really it's the epigenetic influences, everything in the environment, everything that's above the genetics, that actually will you know, write the story, because that will actually tell us, like, it's, you know, the genetics loads the gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger, is the saying. And so these are the things that can turn these genes on and off like a switch. You said they can only be on or off. When we look at the Horvath clock and the DNA methylation biological aging clocks, don't they have, and I had Ryan Smith on a couple of weeks ago, so I do not have my head around the science, but do they not have varying degrees of on or offness, for the want of a better, you know, with methylation?
I've not, well, could be in the,
Might be mixing
in the process. because it doesn't happen instantaneously. So in fact, there's a big call out at the moment about how long does it take to move from one position to another position.
Right.
So I think that is feasible in that respect. But this is another thing that even I think Professor Camson can't quite explain it at this stage. How can the same peptide know when to activate that gene and when to silence?
Modulating. This is the modulating part.
It's a huge thing. So the example I always give is your thyroid gland. So there's our thyroid gland in our necks. I think a lot of us know if you have too little thyroid, it's called hypothyroidism. And many adults have this problem, many.
Yeah.
And it can cause all sorts of problems, your temperature control, your general state of metabolism, how you sleep, etc. And a handful of people, it's less common, but there are people who are hyperthyroid, and they tend to be the opposite. They have a lot of energy, they're too active. Some people refer to them as having the deer in the headlights because their eyes are big.
Their eyes pop out.
Some people think the Mona Lisa was hyperthyroid by looking at her as an but they tend to have the opposite. And yet, if you use the thyroid bioregulator, if you're hypothyroid, it will activate those genes and you will endogenously start producing more thyroid hormones. But if you're hyperthyroid, it will silence them and you'll reduce. It actually puts you within, how should we call it, a normalized. And I think that helps to explain their safety, because if one was to take a thyroid hormone, clearly you're putting that hormone into your blood and it will have an action. The peptides through the genes are instructing the thyroid to activate or to silence, but they're not forcing anything. If one is taking hormone, there's a definite need for monitoring, to have thyroid tests or whatever, because if you keep up too high a level of many hormones, you get what's called downregulation, where you could end up, your own thyroid in this case, could end up stop making thyroid because it says, oh, this stuff's everywhere, we got too much of it. But that doesn't happen with the bioregulators. Wow. So that is, I think, one of the most fascinating parts of this technology.
And this is where it's like super exciting, because like we've to date we've had all the pharmaceutical drugs that have come out which have their place and their time, but they tend to be pushing on a one pathway, and they're having a lot of collateral damage, for the want of a better description. So things that are unwanted implications. And, the example of blood pressure medication, if you give someone who has high blood pressure medication, it'll drop their blood pressure. But if you give someone who's normal blood pressure medication, it'll make it low. So it's forcing it in that downward direction. So whereas with the regulators, you're just making the body, so it's going a step lower, isn't it, or a step higher in the hierarchy, basically, where the body's like just given the permission or the ability to actually regulate itself. Oh no, he needs more or he needs less of this, and therefore brings it back into balance. And that's a very exciting concept, because, I'm very excited by hormones as well, bioidentical hormones and what they can do for people. I think that they're very powerful, amazing things, but we do need to monitor, because we don't want to be pushing too hard on one way or the other way. Not having hormones in the mix, well, then you're just going to age a lot faster and have all the downsides of heart risk and brain risk and everything.
There's no doubt that bioidentical hormones, particularly bioidentical hormones, are incredibly powerful tools, but they're also very complicated. You only have to look to the work of somebody like Dr. Thierry Hertog in Belgium, who is an incredible endocrinologist, and he has an incredible knowledge, but I think there's handfuls of people like him, because it is very complicated once you introduce, just to come back to the thyroid again, there are 4 principal thyroid hormones. We'll use the T names, T1, T2, T3, T4. And yet some countries only use T4. Some countries may use T3. And virtually none of them use T1 and T2, unless you're taking a natural desiccated thyroid like Armour, which comes from pigs. And there in that you get T1, T2, T3, T4. But that's what the peptide's doing. It's instructing your own thyroid gland. So it's going to get the mix right. You're not forcing it in one direction or another.
Yep. And
excuse me.
And when, if I look at liver, so extracts like liver extract or adrenal extract, that have actually come from the liver of a cow usually, or a pig or whatever, is that a crude form of bioregulator that's not been refined enough to say it's this or that?
I have been asked this question before, and in the beginning of my career, and let's be honest, organ extracts were the first big thing in the 1920s and 1930s. Organ extracts were de rigueur, they were the thing. And in my early career, there was a lot of demand for organ extracts, and then it moved on to different things, bioidentical hormones, obviously, in more recent years, and now I think peptides, and other things, but I won't go into those. So yes, I think there is an argument that, obviously, if you, I'm going to forget, Weston Price, there was a man called Weston Price who many, many years ago went and studied native tribes, many of which don't exist anymore. And he discovered a number of things. And there was one in particular that I remember. I think it was a South African tribe, South American tribe, if I remember rightly. And they were eating the necks of animals. And they were consuming the thyroid glands. And he was basically saying how they had no thyroid issues. And if you think about our forebears, they ate every part of an animal. Nothing was wasted, right?
Yeah.
We've become very fussy now. Oh, I won't eat the black meat of a chicken, or whatever it is. Whereas they were eating the organs, the glands, and such like. And so there's no doubt they were consuming the hormones that were coming out of those glands, and probably the peptides as well, and other aspects of it. So yes, I think if you eat glands or specific types, in this case of meats, you will be receiving certain peptides. There's no question of that. It's just the old story that if you take the supplement, you are, of course, getting a much more condensed and measured dose, obviously.
And so, if we go back to the bioregulator story and Professor Cavinson's work, so tell us a little bit his story, because it's a very interesting story, and some of the massive research studies that he did back in the day would be impossible to do now. And so why is this compelling? And I know we're, the war between Russia and Ukraine and the Cold War and that, but let's put that aside for a second and just look at the science, because I always love to just talk about the science, not the politics. Let's not bring that into it. Let's just look at the story and tell us a little bit about that.
Somebody very famous said, I really must go back and find out who it was. And I think no matter where you're from in the world, we can probably make this statement. And they said, I'm proud of my country. I'm just ashamed of my government. So
yes, there's a lot of good citizens in every country.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, with that one. But no, Professor Cavinson back in the 80s was a colonel, and he was a medical colonel, and he received a call from the Kremlin, and they said, because he was at the institute, of course, in St. Petersburg, and he received a call from the Kremlin, and they basically said that the Americans had developed some new battlefield weapons. One was a laser that if it was shone across the battlefield, anyone seeing it would go blind. They said, find something that would fix that. And also they noticed that their submariners who were staying on the floor beds for months on time, and those in missile silos, were aging fast. Now, perhaps that's not surprising when you consider they're maybe sitting 10 feet away from a nuclear reactor, or sort of nuclear radiation. But nonetheless, they were concerned about them and they wanted to find something. Now, they went down some blind alleys. They didn't go to the first thing they saw, but they had one advantage, actually, which I was only made aware of fairly recently. The famous Pavlov, I think everyone has heard the story of Pavlov and the dog salivating and then fell. Well, he came from that same institute many years ago. And he's actually the man that is recognized as discovering short chain peptides. So that institute was aware of these short chain peptides. And I think that may have been an influence for them to go down that path. So, of course, they did in vitro studies, and then they did animal studies, and then they ended up doing human studies. And as you rightly said, Lisa, they did some of the biggest human studies you've ever heard of. The biggest one being Gazprom workers, the people in the oil and gas business. And there were over 11,000 of them who were monitored over 12 years. So, and that one group of 3,000 who took vitamin pills and as a placebo, and then the other 9,000 taking the various peptides. And then they saw the outcomes, and they even followed up on some of those people even longer. They even took over 1,000 people and followed them up almost to the ends of their lives in some cases.
Wow.
So, and they found, and I suppose I should tell you that the outcome of those trials was that those who took the peptides had 1/3 of the morbidity. So in other words, they had 1/3 of the problems that the people in the placebo group had. And unbelievably, in later life, they had 1/3 of the mortality.
Insane. And these are people living in Siberia under stressful, difficult conditions as well. And they had these bioregulators for 3 years, and then it was stopped. But that had a long-term consequence, even 15 years later.
It did.
What were the ones that they were on? Because they were on a combination of 3, weren't they?
There was a few, but the 3 principal ones that kind of come up again and again were the pineal, the blood vessel, and the thymus. Those 3 seem to be the most replicated. There were other tests. There were tractor workers in Kazan, which is very much central Russia. I think there were about 3,600 or 800 people in that trial. Very similar results. There were studies in Kiev, again, in the hundreds of people, similar results. And what I'm pleased to also say, because everyone goes, yeah, but it was the Soviet Union and we don't trust them and all the rest of it. Well, there's an American doctor now by the name of Bill Lawrence. Bill was in Atlanta. And for more than 4 years, in fact, probably 5 years now, he's been replicating the Russian protocols.
Yeah.
And he got the same results. Only he's been doing a lot more tests. He's been doing the Horvath test, the epigenetic test, and he's been the
telomeres. Yeah. So because he's got more advanced technology now to measure things like telomere length. Actually, I had Dr. Suzanne Turner on just a couple of days ago, and she's actually a part of his study. She's a incredible functional medicine doctor herself who used bioregulators and peptides, and she's actually a part of his study. So I was very interested to learn about Dr. Bill Lawrence, and I'd love to interview him. Gosh, it would be amazing.
Well, Bill, last time I spoke to Bill, which a couple of months ago now, he said he's got over 120 people in the trial now. He started originally 39, and most of them are doctors.
Amazing. And Dr. Suzanne's one of them.
There we go.
And if we can replicate what Professor Kevinson was seeing, then we'd have a validation in modern day times in America by an American doctor that this has value, because there is pushback in the community. And I've heard lots of people say, well, that's Russia and how do we trust them? And, and then there's the translation problems and all of that stuff that you've helped actually with Professor Kevinson to bring those translations so that we do have access. So let's go now into the bioregulators themselves. And you've got I think it's 21 bioregulators, and they basically match the organ systems. Now, the nomenclature is very, very confusing. I'm still not got a grip on it. And there's different types and different brands and things like that. But if people are interested in doing this, what's the most accessible point for them to get these? I've been on Epitalin. I'm hoping to get the ovary one, but it's all out of stock at the moment. All the stuff that you have in your range is
it's a temporary blip.
A temporary blip in the supply chain. So we should be able to get this. I'm very, very interested in the thyroid. Work with a lot of people with thyroid issues, and it's very tough. And I've got a mum actually at the moment who has a problem with the thyroid. We've got everything else is looking pretty bloody good, but the thyroid, and we're putting in quite high doses of T3 and T4. But because she's got Hashimoto's and so on, would the thyrogen, I believe is the name of the thyroid peptide?
Right. There are
the
names do get very confusing. I do totally accept that, because they have different names, whether they're from natural sources or synthetic sources. And then they've got different names, whether they're sublingual or injectable, although there's not many of those available, or oral. So it does get rather confusing, I'm afraid. So that's why when you hear me talk, invariably I say the thyroid, the pineal. I keep
talk about the organ system. Yeah. But it would be good to know, like when we're going to actually try these, to buy these supplements, because they are supplements, they're mostly oral or to know what one we're looking at.
I'm going to have to get a glass of water. Do you mind if we just stop there? For
carry on. You go and grab your water. Or grab a cup of tea.
Yeah, well.
And just while Phil's doing that, yes, so there are 21 bioregulators, and we're going to be talking about the organ systems that are involved with this. So there's bioregulators for the thyroid, for the adrenals, for the ovaries, for the prostate, for the lungs. What am I missing? For the blood vessel one is something I'm very interested in. It seems to be part of all the basic peptide stacks that are in the mix. So I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation with Phil about how these work. Now, remembering these are only 2 to 4 amino acids long, and they can actually become gene switches when they can get through the gastric juices, and they can get through into the system and get into the cells and get into the nucleus of the cells and actually influence the gene switches. So what's being turned on and what's being turned off. You'd have heard me talk about, we're influencing our genes all day, every day with everything that we do. So where we are inheriting our genes, we're actually also empowered, because we can actually turn things on and off. So if I hop in a sauna, I turn on a whole lot of genes. If I have a cup of coffee, I'll turn on and off a whole lot of other genes. If I go into a freezer, again. So we are able to turn our genes on and off. So this is where it becomes very, very fascinating in the bioregulators, and how we can actually use that gene on and offness to influence our health and to actually improve our health. So looking forward to continuing this conversation with Phil. I do hope that we can get these out, get the knowledge out. We've done quite a few episodes now with peptides, and obviously I'm a huge fan of those and like to see those more readily available and doctors training in these things. But it is a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult to do, being, subcutaneous injections mostly, with a few variations there. But I think we'll leave it at that while we're just waiting for Phil to come back online. So we're back again, and Phil's got a glass of water, and we're ready for the second round. So we were talking about the 21 bioregulators that are available and the different organs that we relate to them and how difficult the nomenclature is. So let's go through some of the actual organ systems. So we were talking about thyroid in particular. So can you give me a little bit of, because it's one that I'm specifically looking to get for mum, because of the modulatory side of it. Does that tell me a little bit about thyrogen, I think it's called?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So it's a gene switch for thyroid. As we've described, it's a bioregulator. So if folks are low in thyroid, it will raise them up. But if they're too high in thyroid, it will lower them down. But let's also bear in mind that if you're in the normal zone, it'll do nothing for you. It's not going to force the issue. Bodybuilders don't get very excited about these things, because in the example of testosterone, they want to have a superlogical level. Won't happen.
No.
But normal folks, who, especially aging folks, who want to say, I want to maintain a good healthy level, this is where they really come into their own with this safety profile, where you I'm not saying you become laissez-faire in your attitude. And as you pointed out earlier, Lisa, you should always be working with a health professional and know something about what you're doing. But you don't have to be quite so scared about them as you would do if you were using injections, hardcore drugs, and various hormones, of course. So that's the good news. One thing to point out, if you haven't got the gland or the tissue, it ain't going to work.
Right. So if you've had your thyroid removed,
people out there who've had their thyroids removed, and so they're going to have to go on the thyroid hormone. There's no choice for those folks. And the other thing to bear in mind is if you are taking hormones, drugs for your thyroid, in this case, you should, and then you go on to the peptide as well, then monitor yourself extra closely. Because obviously if you're still putting those hormones in at the same level all the time, almost certainly you're going to have to bring them down.
Gotcha.
And possibly even come off them. I have seen that in some cases. So just be aware of that. Now, just a nice little thing you may, your listeners, I hope, may like to know. I like to look at the old-fashioned ways of measuring things. So before there were blood tests, the thyroid was very simply measured, and we can all do this. And that is, you get up in the morning, take your temperature straight away, and write that down. And over about 2 weeks, have a look at that list and see which number appears most often. You will be gobsmacked at how close those numbers are. So I'm going to talk in Celsius. Anyone glad to get their Fahrenheit?
We're in Celsius over here.
But a good thyroid in an adult is between 36.3 and 36.7. If you're over 36.7, rising from bed morning temperature, you're likely to be hyperthyroid. If you're under 36.3, you're likely to be hypothyroid. Brilliant. And believe you me, many people are, for various reasons. Now, there was the late, great Dr. Broder Barnes wrote a book. And that book was called something, I may get this slightly wrong, but Hypothyroidism, the Undiagnosed Epidemic. And in that book, which he probably wrote, I think in the 80s or early 90s, he suggested that 50% or more of the adult population was hypothyroid.
Wow.
Okay. Now, his pupil is a lovely gentleman by the name of Rick Wilkinson, Dr. Rick Wilkinson, and Rick's still very much alive and kicking and practices medicine in Washington State. And I interviewed him some time ago, and I asked him that same question. I said, you're a pupil of Broder Barnes. Broder Barnes said that more than 50% of the adult population was hypothyroid. Is it better today? And he went, no, it's worse. And he said it's over 60%.
Wow.
So there's a lot of people out there suffering with a weak thyroid, and they don't possibly realize that if you just get it back up to normal parameters, many good things happen.
Yeah, and it's underdiagnosed because mostly the doctors will just look at the TSH, and if you're really lucky, a T4, occasionally a T3, but they're not looking at the whole picture. And then you've got your Hashimoto's. So when it comes to Hashimoto's, where the body's attacking its own thyroid tissue, would the bioregulator there help there? The thymus, the thyroid bioregulator help there?
They do, although you've got to be more cautious that's the one possibly area, autoimmune diseases, you've got to be more cautious in your approach. In other words, you don't rush on to a high dose.
Right.
You would take it more cautiously. And by the way, just as a side point here, because I work with, or I have worked with Dr. Walter Pierpaoli from Italy, and this is some people's thyroid problems aren't thyroid problems, they're pituitary problems, because the pituitary gland needs to release thyroid releasing hormone, which releases TSH, which releases the thyroids. So it can actually be not a thyroid problem, but a pituitary problem.
Wow.
And that's a whole story for another day about TRH.
I think we could actually. I just scraping the top of the iceberg there. Studying Dr. Walter Piapauli's work and the TRH, and I haven't got a full grip on it whatsoever. But I would be very interested to talk to you maybe on a separate podcast about the pituitary, the TRH, and the melatonin research that's coming out, because that and I work with quite a lot of people with brain concussion and TBIs and things. And
Yes.
I think one of the underestimated problems with post-concussive syndromes and things is that the pituitary is offline. It's not doing what it should be doing. And that's not being picked up in the initial. So hormones, of course, men testosterone levels dropping, women, their hormones not doing what they should be doing. And that's an undiagnosed thing often as well, I think. Especially here, we don't have SPECT scans or anything that, people are just so told to rest, basically. And it's one of my pet peeves. The head injuries. There's so much we can be doing.
I'd love to talk to you about Walter, because he's one of the most brilliant men I've ever met in my life. And he's in his 80s now, but of course he's famous for his work on melatonin, but he's less known for his work on TRH and the hypothalamus, as well as the pituitary. So, he's got something there, really has.
Yeah.
But of course, of his age and that, he doesn't do as much as he used to do. It's just the way it is. But there are some stories about melatonin that are gobsmackers.
Yeah, maybe we do a whole podcast if you've got time at some point, Phil, in the next month or two. We actually go deep dive TRH, Dr. Walter, and melatonin, absolutely. Because I think that did
be happy to. I consider him a close family friend as well. But I think, just to bring it back to bioregulators now, about the pineal, because melatonin is produced in the pineal. So this is, there is a link to what
there's
I'm
a connection.
saying. There's a connection. And why is the pineal possibly the most important to date of the bioregulators? Well, I feel it is the one that is most likely to be lengthening telomeres. So right. I think everyone out there is familiar with that you have longer telomeres, are more protective. Then, for anyone who doesn't know, they're like the aglets on the end of our shoelaces. They're a little bit of plastic, but in this case, they're on the end of chromosomes. And so the longer they are, the more protective they are. Because if we didn't have aglets on our shoelaces, what would they look like? It'd be a mess, right? Something similar is between telomeres and chromosome. So there's a very strong thinking that the longer the telomeres, the more protective they are. And a lot of people focused. And Dr. Lawrence's work, and also the Russian work, the Russians showed it not in large numbers of people, because bear in mind, in the 90s, 2000s,
we didn't have good...
pretty difficult to get hold of,
yeah,
right? But they showed it extended, particularly in mice. But Dr. Lawrence now, in more recent years, has shown it with his actual patients. These are not young people. These are older people. Although I want to point out, so the pineal, I think, is really important. And of course, by using the pineal peptide, you're also increasing your own endogenous production of melatonin. So now, I can't speak for New Zealand. In America, of course, we all know you can go down Walmart's and buy melatonin without prescription easy. Here in the UK, you need a prescription. I can't speak for New Zealand.
We can't.
No, but isn't it interesting that the peptide can help your own pineal gland produce more melatonin? And just very, very quickly about the role of melatonin, I have one quote from Walter, which I love. Walter once said to me in his fantastic Italian accent, which sounds like music to our ear, right? I won't do it, don't worry. And I won't try and do it. He said, Phil, think of the pineal gland, which is about, if we draw a line from the top of our ears and the middle of our foreheads, the bindu, the Hindu spot, that's the third eye, that represents the pineal. Well, if you draw a line there and you draw a line there, you find the center of your brain. That's where the pineal gland is. It's about the size of a pea, pretty small. One of the things it produces, of course, is melatonin. And if you have what melatonin is produced in response to darkness. Okay, why? Because our body, all the other glands in our body producing whatever hormones, need to know if it's day or night.
Exactly.
It's very simple. And most hormones, not all, but most hormones are produced first thing in the morning. So that's the impetus to get up and get on with the day. Of course, in some hormones, there are pulse height increases through the day, but normally the big bang is in the morning.
Yep.
That's all because of melatonin. So when melatonin's high in blood because of darkness, other hormones, if you will, are suppressed. The moment the light comes up and this drops down, everything else comes into action. So once you've got this healthy circadian rhythm, you've got hormonal cyclicity, you've got a strong immune system. And that's why a lot of the people we see are people working on jet aircraft, you know, and especially the ladies, because their periods are all over the place, or they're having trouble with their fertility because their bodies, you know, 1 minute they're in Australia, the next minute
they're time zones. It's just horrific for the body to.
Exactly. In fact, I read once that, sorry, I'll end with this one, then we'll carry on with other things. But I read once that the body needs, naturally, it needs to recover from 1 hour time difference.
I was just going to say that story. One day.
It is a day. So if you and I are traveling between London and Auckland, you know, it's 12 days, right? Without using melatonin. You can shorten it by using melatonin. But so that's, of course, in the old days when we all went on a ship, that wasn't a problem.
No, but because we were changing time zones, and this is, and I'm seeing lots of people that are mucked up. The hormone cyclicity is all mucked up because of the way that we, you know, our ancient DNA, we used to be in caves and huts, and when it went dark, we had a fire, and that was red light, and that's why you're wearing blue light blocking glasses, because you don't want blue light at night, because that's not the way the world operates. We have blue light during the day. And that brings the cortisol.
I hate to mention it, but this is also Russian research. There are crystals within the pineal gland that react to lunar light. But lunar light and starlight, of course, it doesn't impede the production of melatonin. And when you think about it, that makes sense, because our forebears, nice warm night, sleeping under the tree, you can't have all that starlight and moonlight disrupting your sleep. So it doesn't. It's only the sunlight.
Wow. I didn't know that, because I thought moonlight did as well, and you needed to be in a fully blacked out room to get the benefits.
No, not moonlight, but there's something else going on there. There's a reaction with these crystals, that there's something else going on there. But you're absolutely right, Lisa. One of the worst ones is blue light. Yep. And in our bedrooms now, there's a blinking light on the fire alarm and a blinking light, I don't know, the alarm clock or whatever
remote
it is.
Controls.
Or your blinds are too thin, they're letting the light in. Or your partner is reading or watching some, you know, in which case you've got to get a blindfold, right? So you've got to get yourself in a dark space. Very important.
Very, very important. And wear your blue light blocking glasses, like Phil is so fashionably modeling for us today. And I'm sitting under a daylight lamp because I'm inside in the daytime, right? So, and I'm not getting I'm getting what I can when I'm working. And then I'll get outside when I can. We need, I think, 2 hours a day of exposure to being outdoors. You know, like we don't want to overexpose our skin, but we want to get enough.
If you get more sunlight in the day, you make more melatonin at night.
Exactly. And this is why people who work outside, you know, why you see, like my dad was a classic. He was always outdoors in the garden all day, every day, working in the house or the garden, you know. And he was a smoker, terrible smoker, like 2 packets a day. And eventually, you know, he got arteriosclerosis, arterial stiffness, and he died from a arterial aneurysm, aortic aneurysm.
My father died of emphysema, and and thankfully, and possibly partly because of that, I've never smoked.
No, me neither.
I think that going back to the children, seeing about what can happen is a great way to set your life on the right path.
But with Dad, the fact that despite his bad lifestyle of smoking and eating pies and fish and chips way too often and cakes, because he loved his food, he was healthy up until the day when he went down with that that break. And I think it's because he spent all day out day. He was strong, powerful, functionally fit.
Yeah.
And his downfall was smoking.
Living against nature. We're not in a battle against nature. He was probably grounding himself as well. Standing on grass or whatever. And
bare feet all the time.
Plenty of sunlight, plenty of vitamin D production, etc., etc. Having good sleep at night time. It all goes hand in glove, all this stuff.
Yeah, and he was 81 when he died, and he would have lived for another 20 years if he didn't have that particular, because he had smoked for 2 packs a day for 50 something years, and he still didn't have any lung issues or anything. He was so lucky in his unluck, but just to show the importance, I think, of being outdoors. We are made to be outdoors working outside, and unfortunately our days don't allow us that when we're working now on computers and things a lot. So I supplement with a bit of extra daylight, and then I get outside and get my 2 hours exposure a day if I can.
If you ever want to, Lisa, I'm not going to suggest it today, but if you want to ever talk about the work of a guy called Professor Paul Clayton from the Royal College of Medicine in London, and his studies of what we would call the mid-Victorians, this is people that were around from sort of 1830 to 1850, just pre-industrialization, everybody's shocked to learn they lived as long as we did.
Wow.
And that's taken from the data at the London libraries. Okay. And because everyone assumes, longevity is going up and up and up. Yeah,
because of our medical.
It's not anymore. Okay.
No, it's not now.
But actually there's a blip in those mid 1800s, and that's not accounted for in the generalities. And if you want to know why, I'll go into it, because he's come up with all the data as to what, and part of it was that these guys were hardworking, hardworking, outside all the time. Yeah, nobody had a car, nobody had, you're a rich man if you had a horse. So, there was no gym membership in 1830. You had to get on.
You just worked all day outside, and it's functional fitness. It's getting down on the floor, it's pulling, it's pushing, it's doing all these functional movements, and we replicate them by going to the gym. But actually, if we were to be doing hard manual labor all our lives, and you look at the people in places like Nepal or, where they're still living like that, they have other problems because often they don't have the best medical care when they do get something and so on. And so, but if you look at how healthy they are, how strong they are, how powerful they are, and if you gave them the same medical treatments that we can get hold of, man, they would probably live for a lot longer, I think.
They probably would.
There's something to be said.
The comment I made, that was getting past childhood diseases. A lot of people, of course, childhood.
Course.
But once they got into adulthood, I should have pointed that out, they lived as long as we did.
I gotcha. So, yeah. And that brings the statistics, because a lot of the people argue, back in the caveman days, they only lived until they were 30. Yeah, that's true, because they didn't survive the first year of life usually. Like, a lot of people died, so it brought the average down. But if we take out that, once you were an adult, and I do want to go back to the bioregulators, but I did want to mention one thing, because before we were talking, before we recorded, we were talking about the dangers of excessive aerobic exercise once you hit your 40s and beyond, 35 to 40, and onwards. And I heard you talk about that on another podcast, and I was like, wow, okay, that's my experience. You said that oxygen and aerobic training is a double-edged sword, and that you tell me in your own words, why can over-exercising and cardiovascular exercise actually be detrimental for your stiffness of your artery?
I'll be happy to. And there is one other side story to this. There's a thing called hormesis, and hormesis is proposed by Professor Suresh Rattan from Denmark. And basically it's mild stress. And he basically says, this is good for you. This is good for us. And when you think about it, your average exercise is exactly that. You're doing damage to your muscles in order for them to regrow, get stronger, whatever, right? But not in an extreme way. Okay. Now, just as an interesting side note, and I will be happy to get into that story we discussed earlier, is the Russians have used these peptide bioregulators in their Olympic teams. And they use them after the event, and they also use it in their cosmonauts to induce protein synthesis to get recovery back as fast as possible. Now, there's a lovely picture of the young girls, 18, 19, 20 years old, of the Russian gymnastic team who won the gold medal in London at the last London Olympics. And when they came back to Russia, they took the girls' blood, and they were horrified to find their telomeres had dramatically shortened and were equivalent to a 40-year-old. So you looked at this 20-year-old girl, super fit, just won a gold medal in gymnastics, you can imagine, and she had a terrible telomere. And the only reasoning is the extreme exercise leading up to the event, at the event, and then trying to recover afterwards. Now, they did put them on the peptide bioregulators, and I'm very happy to say that within just a few weeks, they saw a complete recovery.
Wow.
And they do a similar thing to the cosmonauts who put themselves, in their case, in an extreme environment, being in space for a year or whatever it is. So there's a guy called Dr. Rich Lippman, lovely guy, Rich, and he's a free radical expert. In fact, he's been nominated for the Nobel Prize for it. He's a Swedish gentleman. And he's written a book, which can be found on the usual places, called Stay 40. And I find it a very interesting book because he approaches a number of problems that occur with aging, and he offers 3 solutions. And his 3 solutions are based on, if you haven't got a lot of time and money, do this because it will help you. If you've got a bit of time and money, do that because it's better. And if you really want to do the gold standard, do this. So it's like a 1, 2, 3
awesome
approach.
I'll have to get it.
Yeah, really good. And so there's a section in that book. Rich, of course, describes how our bodies have 3 natural defense lines for free radicals in our body, and how our bodies, naturally make free radicals. Okay. Now you might be thinking, oh yeah, if I was near Chernobyl, I'd have a hell of a problem with. Yes, there's always outside influences, of course there are, but just in our day-to-day living, and of course as we get older, so the mitochondria are the organelles that produce the energy in every cell of our body, and unfortunately the ultimate energy being ATP and enzyme triphosphate, everything, all the glucose is transformed to ATP. But like government, as we get older, the mitochondria become larger and less efficient. Just like government.
Love it.
And unfortunately, even if you've got, let's say you've got poorly performing mitochondria in your liver, it can't go and borrow ATP from perhaps your kidneys, which are performing well. It doesn't work like that. So it's very dependent upon the tissue and the organ they happen to be residing in. So what Richard describes in that book, Stay 40, is as we age, how some of these defense mechanisms break down, and that if we don't support them with the right nutrition, they just get worse and worse. And the mitochondria, by using copious amounts of oxygen, at one level, it produces a lot of energy. On another level, it's very damaging. And it can end up producing some of the worst free radicals that we naturally produce, which are the superoxide radical and the hydroxyl radical. So what most people don't know is, because of this banding, you have to take a kind of plethora of antioxidants. You've got good ones like glutathione, right? And it's a good one, but it ain't going to do it all. And what you're basically doing is you're kind of forcing it down to the next level. So you might be neutralizing the worst free radicals, but if you don't have it in the next level, you'll just create more in the next level.
Wow. So is this why the whole antioxidant, we used to think 20 years ago, oh, we've got too much oxidative damage and free radicals running around. We just put antioxidants in the mix and Bob's your uncle, we're going to be healthy forever. That was the theory.
There's more to it.
30 something years. It doesn't work.
Earlier, he came up with that free radical theory of aging. He was actually a chemist, and he saw it happening in oils and stuff. And then he said, "Oh, is this what's happening in the body?" I think it's more complicated than that. But there's no question that free radicals are damaging. and if they get out of control. So in Richard's book, it's a very interesting section where he has a bunch of people, about 20 people, middle-aged people, men and women, and they're standing there in their underwear. You see them, and they're all a bit flabby and this and that and the other. And they all decided to go over about a year, 18 months, to go on to an aerobic exercise program. Okay. And it was aerobic. They didn't do, as far as I'm aware, they didn't do much in the way of strength.
Weights. Yeah.
No, they just really was aerobics. Okay. And what happens is you go through and you read on, and suddenly you get to a page and you see these same people again standing in their underwear, and they all look better. To a person, they've lost weight, they look trimmer. You think, oh, well, there you go. That proves it. But what he doesn't do is he doesn't show you their heads, you see. And then I didn't notice that the first time I looked at it. And then you turn over another page, and now you have the heads before and the heads now. And after a year, 18 months, I would say most of them look 10 years older. The hair is grey, the skin is sagging, wrinkles have appeared. It very much shows in the face. So Richard's argument was, these are older people. They went on to really quite tough aerobic exercise, and they didn't protect themselves.
They had the free radical damage.
Exactly.
Yep.
So and they should have mixed up a bit, but
yeah, I think as an ultra endurance athlete, and I watch some of my colleagues who are now in their 50s and 60s and are still doing the same thing, because we can go, like, our endurance doesn't drop, our speed drops. But a 19-year-old and a 64-year-old are at the same level of aerobic, VO2 max. So with ultra marathons, you peak at about 48. And women is almost as good as the men on the really long stuff. That's another story. But so I have got colleagues that are in their 60s and 70s even that are still doing massive amounts of ultra endurance, and they have very good cardiovascular. They're fit, they're strong, they're lean. What they usually look like is old boots, dried out, dehydrated. Often, they look older in the face. And I think partly that's to do with you lose fat in your face. And of course, fat in your face makes you look younger. So I wouldn't want to put it all down to the free radical theory there. But I do think that, and I know myself personally, 70% of my training is now weight training. Right. It's resistance work, it's building muscle and mobility work. Yep.
Or it bursts, right? It's not prolonged.
No, and the short aerobic. So now 5K run is my sort of go-to, not a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70K run.
I have a friend who I hadn't seen for a number of years, and then I met him. And at first I didn't want to say anything because he was much thinner, rather drawn, the pallor. I honestly thought he'd had cancer. I looked at him and thought, oh my God, you've got cancer. And he went, what do you think then? I've been doing marathons and da-da-da-da-da. And I couldn't say anything to him, but honestly, he didn't look healthy to me. We discussed a little earlier off screen, didn't we, Lisa, that we used to measure arterial stiffness in people.
This is interesting.
And I noticed that I could start telling, look at these people who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who were doing, Ironmans and all those sorts of things, extreme aerobics, really pushing themselves, cycling or running or whatever the case may be. And you looked at them and you thought, well, you're fit. There's no question you're fit, but you don't look quite right. Like you said, you look older, you're quite drawn and da-da-da-da. But when we tested their arterial stiffness, they were always bad.
That's scary.
And the reason is this, it's a hand in glove kind of situation. They're generating a lot of free radicals, then don't have, as they're getting older, they're not doing the right things, the right foods, the right supplements,
antioxidants,
negate these things, okay? And on top of that, they're accelerating their glycation. And glycation is where proteins cross-link with oxygen and glucose. This is a big problem for diabetics. This is where diabetics do not live as long, and a measurement for diabetes is to measure how many glycated proteins there are in the individual.
Yeah.
Well, you get this in extreme sports people as well.
Wow.
Now, I'm aware that these athletes, in the studies I've read, don't live as long as the average person. And I think it's just tipping the balance. It's everything in life that I'm seeing is on a curve, and the curve sometimes is U inverted or a U, and you want to be in the middle, right? So take a stupid one, drinking water. If you drink too much water, it's dangerous. If you drink too little water, it's dangerous. You want to be in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's true of everything we do. You want to be in the middle. You don't want to go to the extremes.
Yeah.
So, and I just want to mention, if I may, the work of a cardiologist, the late cardiologist, unfortunately, is some time ago, American cardiologist. His name was Kenneth Kenzie. And he wrote a book which could be found on Amazon for peanuts now, called The Blood Thinner Cure.
Oh, yes.
And it's pretty good, pretty interesting book. So what he did is he went out and he analyzed all the usual cardiovascular markers. So cholesterol, HbA1c, homocysteine, triglycerides, all the things that, you know, we've come across. He decided in the end, he evaluated them all, and he said there are two markers, he said, that are head and shoulders more important than any other marker. And those were blood viscosity and arterial stiffness. Now, blood viscosity, in other words, keep your blood a bit thin. You don't want it too thick. And you want to keep your arteries soft and pliable, within reason, of course. Now, at the time, he didn't know what to recommend to keep arteries softer. And that's actually where I reached out to him with Dr. Wardine, and we had a conversation and we were able to share some data with him. And he had some pretty simple advice in the book, like take aspirin, drink water, stop smoking, don't drink too much alcohol, that sort of thing.
Give blood.
Give blood. Now, if I may, I don't know if you've already told this story to your folks, I'll shut up.
No.
But I got this from the great Jonathan Wright, Dr. Jonathan Wright, a man I have extreme respect for. He's written many books, many subjects. And he told me this story many years ago. So a man to the age of about 50 has twice the risk of a heart attack or stroke of a woman up to the age of about 50. Okay. But past the age of 50, women catch us up and even can overtake us. So what on earth is going on around the age of 50 for a woman that makes her change her condition? Well, principally it's menopause, of course. Now, yes, we can argue that the loss of estrogen in the woman, it is protective, and therefore that she is at risk by lowering her estrogens. I will accept that. But she also does something else. She stops giving blood. She stops having periods.
Yep.
So what? So how is there any other evidence? Well, yes, there is. A man up to the age of 50 at least, who donates a pint of blood every 6 months at the blood bank, halves his risk of a heart attack or stroke.
Everybody listen to that carefully.
Right?
All the men out there.
Now, what I don't know, people have often said to me, what happens if a woman does that? I haven't seen the data, but I'm going to presume that even her goes down. Now, why would that be? I think two reasons. Firstly, you are getting rid of some toxins. Go back to the old days, there was bloodletting, and a certain amount of bloodletting seemed to have a beneficial effect. Of course, they went too far, took too much blood out of the patient. But yeah, so a lady every month is getting rid of some toxins, right? That's him. That's what the man can't do that. But secondly, we're forcing our bodies, our bone marrow, to produce more blood. And in the manufacture of that new blood, the blood is thinned. The blood becomes less viscous.
I just had Dr. Christian Drapeau on, and he's a stem cell scientist. My brain just went, when you're producing more blood, are you also producing more stem cells? Therefore, I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing a connection there.
I think so. Funny enough, I've got to add this. Sorry, Lisa, to add this in with the bioregulators, we're beginning to see evidence that the folks who are using the bone marrow peptide, there is a bone marrow peptide, are seeing greater activity of their own stem cells.
Brilliant. Okay.
And that would follow with what you were just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dr. Christian, go and check his work out, actually. So he has a product that he's been, that I'm now selling too, is Stem Regen. And it mobilizes more stem cells out of the bone marrow. So it's using things like sea buckthorn berries and aloe macroplata and fucus something or other, a few different things that he studied to mobilize more stem cells. So maybe this bioregulator combined with, that would be better, wouldn't it? Like more stem cells, better.
I've also heard that lithium orotate.
Oh, yeah, which is good for.
Lithium orotate can have all sorts of other benefits. Anyone,
depression,
for example, will know about lithium orotate. So it's nice to have, but that's what it's all about. It's getting the facts and having those choices, and then acting upon them. You know,
and I just love connecting the dots, you know, like when you start to talk to people, and this is the beauty of what you and I do. We get to talk to different people from different, because we were talking off air about, you know, when you're a professor and you're deep in the one thing, you're an expert in the one thing. And the beauty of what we do is that we get to interview everybody about all of the things.
Keep an open mind.
Trades. Yeah.
That's what I suggest. Keep an open mind. You might not understand it. You might not believe it. But rather than poo-poo it, park it somewhere, and one day you might draw it out and say, oh, hang on, that goes with what I heard and I didn't believe it. When I first heard Professor Kamsin lecture in Istanbul, I remember it was one time it happened to me. His lecture was followed by coffee break, and everybody left the auditorium, but I didn't. I sat on my seat because I was trying to compute what I just heard, and I was literally saying to myself, well, either this is the biggest load of BS I've ever heard, or this is one of the most fantastic things I've ever come across. And it took me the best part of a year or two, having met him again, having started to read some of his papers and talking to other people, when I finally went, Jesus, I think there's really something here, you know? So, you know, all of us take time to change our mind. It's just the way, nature of things. Yeah. But somebody once said, to put a joke into it, never poo-poo a poo-poo.
Love it. But it is a privilege of the sort of work that we do, and you much more deeper and more at a higher level than I do. But you get to meet and you get to be across a lot of the science to a not so deep degree, but you've got an understanding, and sometimes you can make connections then because you're that plus that could be very interesting, and maybe I'll connect those two people. They might be interested.
No, it's lovely when that happens. It's lovely, isn't it? When that. Yeah. That's how progress really made, actually.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful that when those sorts of, and that's why I think, you know, it doesn't matter so much that, you know, I don't have a medical background per se, as in the traditional sense. But you're also not confined by that one way of learning.
I did 3 degrees, and what I know today, 95% of what I know today had nothing to do with any of them.
Yeah,
because
it taught you to learn. That was what.
Yeah, it taught certain ways of doing things, but outside of that, you know, and this field is changing so fast that if you don't watch the videos, read the books, go to the conferences, you're going to get left behind. You know, it's as simple.
Now, let's come back just briefly to the bioregulators, because we still haven't done them justice on what they do. And let's just go through some of the systems. So we've talked about the thyroid one. Tell me about the thymus. No, let's go for the pineal gland, because that is the one that's up top, most important, should be in most of the protocols.
Absolutely. Well, what we're seeing is, I think I alluded to it earlier, we're seeing people increase their own endogenous production of melatonin. and we're also, which with its consequential benefits, and we're also seeing increases in telomere length. And I think that's primarily down to the pineal gland. Now, Bill Lawrence is currently writing and putting together a new PowerPoint where he's going to talk about how these different peptide bioregulators are causing organ regeneration, which I think is going to be big. Okay, I can't say any more about that yet because I haven't even seen it myself yet. But you know, it's very specific. You can say, well, you've got 21 things here: glands, some tissues, some organs, and they're having an impact on those materials. But they're quite specific. It is easier to explain the glandular ones because, for example, there is an adrenal bioregulator. Now, the adrenal glands produce a lot of hormones. You have your DHEA and your cortisol and your aldosterone and lots of different ones. So you do get quite a cross-balancing when you take the adrenal. And I mentioned the adrenal because of all the bioregulators I either personally used or I know of people who've used them, that one is one where people talk to me very quickly and say, wow, that made a difference.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, like within a month, they're saying, this is a real difference here. Of course, I've got people who do their before and after tests. They take their testosterone before and they take their testosterone after. And, you know, we've seen improvements across the board in the majority of people. So it's difficult. You know, when it comes to anti-aging, people are, what's the best single thing you can do? You know, and health is like a pyramid. I always think of health as a pyramid. If you've got to do the basics, you've got to have a base to the pyramid, right? So if you got to be eating decently, you got to be exercising okay, you got to be de-stressing. You know, if you're not doing those things, what's the point in trying to put any more material on top? You know, none of this is an excuse to eat McDonald's every day and have 14 pints of beer.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It doesn't fix that. You know, I'm not saying you can't have a little bit of excess here and there. I mean, that's, you know, you've got to be doing the basics.
Yeah.
So once you've got your house in order, as it were, the base, now you start building on it. You could really start seeing some spectacular results. What we don't know yet, of course, is by how much human longevity will be increased. You know, whether there is
too long. Can't test it yet.
We don't really know. But I think most people would agree it may not matter how long we live, providing that all the years we have are vital and we remain independent, lucid, and agile, right?
Love that.
Because if you've got those things, you've got everything.
Yeah. And as someone who's lived with disability for the last 7-8 years with mum, you know, it's really, really tough on the loved ones and on the person when you're not completely fully independent. And she's pretty bloody good, but still, you know, high needs, and nobody wants that. If I could have prevented that for her, God, you know, that'd be wonderful. And nobody wants that slow decline and being a pain in the, you know, and not being independent. And
it's a mentality we have to shift, because when you say to people, oh, what are you doing? So I'm really into longevity medicine. They kind of go, you're crazy, because they are automatically assuming the older you are, the more decrepit you are.
Yeah.
Therefore, what's the point?
We're stopping the decrepitness.
Exactly. I don't want another 6 years in a care home. No, that's not the point.
Exactly. We want to prevent you ever having to be in a place like that, because you'll still be driving a car at 100 and still be out in the garden and then maybe you come in from the garden one day, sit down and drop dead. That would be the ideal, wouldn't it? Like, rather than the slow deterioration.
I'd be controversial. Do you mind me being controversial?
No, go for it.
Sometimes it upsets people, but this is a generality, and therefore, as all generalities, it's not true for everybody. In my career, when I talk about older people, men and women are different on one level. In the main, men want to keep their performance. They feel threatened by younger men, whether that's in the workplace or in the bedroom, and they want to keep a good standard of performance. Women want to look good. in the main,
Yeah.
right? And I think a lot of men would sacrifice. I'm not saying they don't want to look good, but they don't care too much if they lose their hair or this, providing they maintain their performance. So as a generality, I find that's true.
Yep.
So I'm not saying there's pros and cons against both those things.
Both lead to an anti-aging regime, because if you look older on the outside, your skin's sagging, your hair, you're graying, all of those things are signs of things that are going on the inside. Absolutely. And therefore, they are a true reflection of your internal age or biological age.
Biological age measures. I've got to tell you one of my true story. So it was a long time ago now. I had a couple of my girls go down to the big health show in London at Olympia, and people were coming off the underground station. And as they were going into the show, there was some kind of quiz or competition, win a prize. I can't remember now. And they asked them 2 questions. And they said, please give me your answer. So we asked people, this was some time ago. I hope it's not as bad now. Perhaps actually we ought to do it again to see if it's changed. So they asked different people, excuse me, if I told you about anti-aging medicine, do you think you'd want it? And the answers were no, because I'm too old for it. And the main answers, and no, because I'm too young for it. Right?
Brilliant.
Which was really funny, because it made us wonder what's the right age. You have to be 48.6 maybe, I don't know. But we just found it really weird that these people either thought they were too young or too old to benefit.
Yeah, and neither's true. Like aging starts, like in that Dunedin Pace study, they can already tell from the 3-year-olds who's aging faster. That's amazing.
A very controversial point about when does aging start. If a baby's born, because some people say, well, if we classify aging as a disease and a baby's born, you can't say it's got a disease. I don't know. The Catholic Church says it's full of sin. And that's, no, sorry, that's a bit controversial to say that. But there is one thing, and the late great pharmacologist by the name of Joseph Knoll from Hungary, brilliant man, who died well into his 90s, I'm pleased to say. And I could tell you many things about Joseph, but he, I think, put it very succinctly, because ended up asking him, when does aging start? And at puberty, because, and the reason for that is the moment we turn around sort of 13, the first gland that atrophies is our thymus gland, right? So it's almost like Mother Nature's saying, you're ready to procreate, so therefore we start winding you down. So some people say it starts at puberty. I personally think that's probably pretty accurate.
Yeah. And when our hormones change is when we start to notice it. So often in our 30s to 40s, we start going, oh, we're not repairing as well. We're not doing this as well. What the hell's happening to me? And there's a whole raft of things that we've been talking about. But that's when you need to be doubling down on this stuff, and the earlier you start, and I think we do need to be teaching our kids to eat better. Like if I think about the amount of sugar I ate as a kid, I'm horrified now looking back. My parents didn't know any better. Horrified, and that's probably not done me too well, and it's probably why I don't have asthma now when I had asthma when I was younger and things like that, not just the sugar, but other things. But coming back to the bioregulators, so we've gone through the pineal, the adrenal, the thymus, the ovary one. Tell me about the ovary one. As someone who's middle of menopause, is this going to slow things down?
Yeah, first of all, back to what we said earlier, doesn't do anything for men because they haven't got any ovaries, right? And same way the testes one doesn't work for women because they haven't got any testes. So just be aware of that. And the prostrate is the only other one that is not going to work in the ladies, obviously. But the ovary one appears to have a balancing factor on both estrogens and progesterone, okay? And I think the progesterone side of it is really important because, and this is the work of Dr. Jonathan Wright, who wrote a brilliant book that was originally titled Don't Let Your Doctor Give You Horse Urine, because that is
the progestins,
exactly come from. That's another story.
Women's Health Initiative disaster.
Right. Yeah. So not bioidentical, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
natural in a horse, but it's not natural.
I had a doctor last week tell my client there is no such thing as bioidentical. And she went
Really?
to took a Dutch
Well, they
test and
haven't found
said, "Can
any.
I?"
They haven't found
There was,
any yet.
yeah. Oh, anyway.
No, well, they're not shown, you see, until the pharmaceutical rep comes in and says, "Oh, by the way, we've got this." You know, there are at least 3 studies that show that giving bioidentical progesterone in women with breast cancer is very effective.
Mm.
And yet most oncologists will recoil in horror if you were to suggest it, because of course the synthetic drug does exactly the opposite, and they're the ones that they are familiar with. So yeah, very, very different. So the good thing about the bioregulator ovary is you're going to get a rebalancing of estrogens and a rebalancing of progesterone. And I just emphasize progesterone because during menopause, estrogens, 3 principal estrogen, I know there's breakdowns of that, but you've got estriol, which is the weakest one. Dr. Jonathan Wright reckons the average, if that's the right term to use, woman produces 90%. It's the anti-carcinogenic mild estrogen. Then you've got estradiol, which is about 7% of the average woman's production. And then you've got estrone, which is 3%. Those go into decline. And you can often see a lady at the other end of menopause perhaps producing 60 or 70% less of those hormones, okay? But with progesterone, they often go to
90
0,
something percent,
even lower, even 0.
Wow.
Okay? Yet many doctors, even those who believe in HRT or NHRT, natural hormone replacement therapy, I wouldn't say they do, but the ones that do regular HRT often ignore progesterone.
Yes, you must be on progesterone if you're going to be on estrogen.
If the ladies want to get into this out there, get the books of Dr. John Lee, who he had 2 books, What Your Doctor Won't Tell You About Menopause, they were both called. So that is a really good insight into this.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing progesterone levels dropping in 20-something-year-olds and 30-something-year-olds now, which is unusual. Like it seems to be dropping off a cliff earlier. And of course, that's, you know, your anxiety and all that sort of stuff goes up when your progesterone drops.
I think we've got a couple of issues at play here. We've got what the UN refer to as endocrine disruptors.
Exactly.
So you've got plastics and pseudoestrogens in the water supply, in the food. What isn't in plastic? The water's wrapped in plastic, the sandwiches are wrapped in plastic, right? There are big problems there. Plastics in the sea, etc., etc., etc. That's a big problem. You've also got, if you're drinking the tap water, for our American friends, the faucet water, then you are drinking the drugs that your neighbors are using, because the local sewage plants do not have the facilities to remove mainstream medicines from the water, okay? And even though you might say yes, but you know the level of Viagra or Prozac or any other, or statins, is in the millions and billions, and that is true. But how much water do you drink every day? How often do you drink water? What happens in 5 years? What happens in 10? What about children? What about pregnant women? What about, right, it goes on and on, doesn't it? Germans, some years ago, they went randomly to their states and they tested their tap water, and they found traces of all the major prescription drugs in it.
Wow.
And what is the #1 prescription drug?
Oral contraceptive.
Exactly.
Estrogens.
Exactly. And everybody's getting it.
And what happens? What happens to look at the young boys, and you know, you've got a lot more estrogen dominant phenotypes. You're seeing that more.
We could be very controversial and say, is it an accident that we hear more about transgenderism today than we ever have? I know there are other pressures and social pressures, but
there's an endocrine pressure as well, is what you're saying, and that I, you know, and by the same token, that, you know, women, their hormones and our fertility rates and things are going down. You know, these are facts. These are not, you know, we're not being political here at all. But I think it's just understanding these influences, that we're living in this toxic environment, the soup, and so we need to, you know, be supporting our bodies as best we can, which I've talked about ad nauseum on the show.
A non-medical friend approached me the other day and said, if he was to invest in anything in medicine, what would I invest in? And I didn't mean to sound facetious when I said it, but I said I'd probably look into fertility clinics. I think we're going to see an explosion in them. You know,
Yep.
men and women are going to struggle to have children.
Yep. As someone who's been through a long fertility journey, and I wonder how much my problems were related to, one, being on the oral contraceptive since the age of 13 because I had problems with the period, and what were those problems, where it turns out I had endometriosis and adenomyosis and fibroids later on, you know, and now I understand all that. And then you add on an extreme sports career onto top of that, and I couldn't have kids, you know, and I waited a little bit too long, I think. But this is a unfortunate, you know, how many people are doing themselves this disservice, you know?
Yeah.
And we're seeing that drop off a cliff. So is there any other of the bioregulators? Oh, I did want to talk to you about spermidine, because spermidine is one of my favorite topics, and I'm actually hopefully bringing out a spermidine supplement shortly. What's your take on spermidine, and, you know, do you think that should be part of a good regime?
Yeah, I mean, you know, everybody's regime is different. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not talking about the basics, you know, not drinking clean water and eating. That's, we should all take that for granted. But in terms of the next level of the pyramid, you know, the additional level, shall we say, it depends what you want to do. Everything in life comes down to cost and convenience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How inconvenient, how costly, you make the choice. But spermidine is getting a lot of people excited. Principally, I think, although I've heard the ladies say better skin, better hair, better nails, I think principally because it's action to improve autophagy, which is the natural cleaning of cells. I'm a big fan of Bill Falloon. Bill Falloon is the founder of the Life Extension Foundation in America. Bill also runs the Age Reversal Network. You can go and find it online, of course. And he's trying to get people together to go into these clinical trials where, for the first time, multiple things will be used. Not necessarily drugs, could be supplements. And he's got and I'm going to feature it in our Aging Matters magazine, maybe the next one, but fairly soon, hopefully this year anyway, where he's got a thing called the stair-step approach to biological age control. So he's got several steps, and the steps have a different terminology. So I do a couple of the early ones. You've got activate AMPK, right? You've got a second step, which would be improve autophagy, right? You have a third step, which would be mTOR. You have another step, which would be reduce senescent cells, actually removing dead cells from the body. So what I would suggest is that spermidine has a very prominent place on one of those biological steps. NAD is one of his steps. Improve your NAD level.
Yep. We do a lot of that as well.
Guys drink NMN, and there are things as well, of course, but that's the supplement.
Big on NMN.
Yes. So I think spermidine is on one of those steps as a very prominent supplement.
Yeah, and so autophagy is the getting rid of, it's the recycling sort of process of getting rid of damaged cells and stuff. And this is so critical, and it actually hits, you know, so many of the hallmarks of aging, spermidine. So I'm really excited about it as you know, everything from immunity to cardiovascular to, you know, to skin, hair, and all of that sort of thing. Plus getting rid of these, you know.
Should I look at it? I look at it like pruning. You know,
you prune out The bad
If
stuff.
you're into gardening, if you don't deadhead your roses, they're not going to grow as well, are they?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so autophagy and the removal of senescent cells is kind of like our pruning.
Yep, yeah, exactly. And then there's things like rapamycin, which is also very exciting, but it's a drug and you have to have that prescribed. It's got very interesting benefits on the senolytic side of things, getting rid of those damaged cells. So all of this is just absolutely great, isn't
Anybody
it?
that wants to get into rapamycin, very good new book out by Dr. Ross Pelton. Available on Kindle as well, so that's very cheap. I've forgotten exactly what he calls it, but it's got rapamycin in the title.
I'll have a look at that too.
Get hold of one.
I've got a lot of reading after this interview. No, this is just fabulous because you're up on everything, like literally you're all over the place.
I have my moments of procrastination, don't worry. So as that top shelf behind me is books I haven't read yet.
Yeah, you're like me. I've got all these amazing things that I've got to get through. And I find it easier to digest like podcasts and things because you can do it on the go when you're running or you're driving or anything,
For me, that's what holidays are for.
Yes, well, God, when was the last time I had a holiday?
With a book,
Look, I could talk to you for hours, Phil. I definitely want to have you back on if you'll do me the honor of coming back on, because I do want to dive into Walter Piapaldi's work and maybe some of this, rapamycin stuff. And I also wanted to talk to you about ACP 228. What's that?
Yeah.
Actually, we just briefly touched on that.
ACF, yeah.
ACF 228.
Ultimate formula for free radical control.
Is that available? Is that a thing that's available?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a nutritional thing, but it's got lots of good stuff in it.
Okay, where do you get that? Because that was new to my radar. So I was just listening to one of your lectures.
Profound will have it. So
Profound Health. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're going to put links. And now I have your team has helped me set up some stuff, and you've got explain your complicated web presence, because it is like we need to explain it to people so that they can understand where they go to get the science and where they go to buy the stuff.
Sure, absolutely no problem. So what we have is the master site is antiagingsystems.com, and you can spell it with an E or without an E, so that's not a problem. So my eldest brother, being very British, likes to wind me up when I see him say, and he says to me, "Are you still doing the anti-agging?" Because most of the time we spell it without an E for our American friends. But anyway, so that's the master. That has been the longest. That website has been up since the early 90s or mid 90s. We have literally hundreds of articles, interviews, videos, all that sort of good stuff, with references. As I know sometimes there's too much there, but you can look up what you want. And if you want to, it will take you to stores where you can buy those products. But that is an information site. It is not a selling site. Okay. And then you can go to profoundhealth.com, which is a nutrition site, and a lot of the peptides are there. Not all of them, but a lot. The ones we've spoken about, the bioregulators, are there. There's also profoundsupplements.com, which is the American site. So if you want to buy those products that you can buy freely in America, like DHEA and melatonin and things like that, that's where they are. And then we have a hardcore site called the Anti-Aging Store, where you will find certain medicines and what I would refer to as grey products. They're not got one foot in one camp and one foot in another. That's there. But the go-to site, and by the way, there's a magazine site,
which tell us.
matters.com. Folks
Aging
can go
Matters.
there, register, download digital copies for free, or pay $10 and have one sent to you if that's what you prefer, to have a physical one. And but the go-to site is antiagingsystems.com, because you'll find all the information there. And if you find something you like, it will offer you a link saying buy from an approved store, and it will take you to the store.
Excellent. So that explains, because I've been like confused as hell for the last few weeks.
It's complicated because what we do is truly international.
Yes,
There's
I
no
get it
one
now.
that we can put all these things in. It's just not possible. So today we're operating from the UK, we're operating from Hong Kong, we're operating from Taipei, and we've just started in Dubai. So each place is doing different products,
different jurisdictions, different things that are allowed, and therefore this complicatedness with the thing. But that's fabulous that we're having access to these things, and then you'll have to check whether it's allowed in your country that you're listening to. And that's up to you then. And always, you know, this is education only. Please do work with your medical professionals. I have to keep, you know, reinforcing that. Unfortunately, there's not enough medical professionals often to find. So that's always a struggle. And we're trying to, you know, change things there and get more people educated on these things. And this is just, you know, it's fabulous. It's absolutely amazing. Is there anything that you'd like to add that you're super excited, something we don't know about that's coming down the line? Anything that you just want to add there, Phil?
Well, I'm following this stair-step approach to biological age control closely, because it's maybe one of the first times that multiple things have been brought together in individuals to see what happens to these people, healthy aging people over time. I'm still learning about the peptide bioregulators. I think there's still more to come. Others will undoubtedly come to the fore. They may need Professor Cavinson's blessing to be signed off as bioregulators, but I think there's still a lot more to learn. And peptides in general are a very exciting field, providing the authorities don't slap us down and break it. The trouble is, you alluded earlier that, you know, a lot of the peptides, the long chain peptides, need to be injected or perhaps used intranasally. Unfortunately, even if that was vitamin C, if you go down that route, you make it a drug.
Yeah.
Right. You
and
inject
it's just
it becomes a drug, right? So that's one of the things. So the fact that the bioregulators do work orally, are in foods, is hopefully a strong indicator that they will remain as food supplements.
That's very, very important.
Food supplements.
Yeah.
Do you know, in the UK, the MHRA, who control the medicines, actually have in their edict a statement where it says that any chemical that has a biochemical change within the body, they consider to be a drug.
Anything.
Well, anything. So that is sunlight, that is water, that is food, that is exercise. It's a ridiculous
statement, but they can grab back to that if they want to be a pain in the butt with the regulations. And, you know,
and you know that laughter is the best medicine, so I think we'll need a prescription for that soon.
We won't be able to fart like soon. It'll be illegal. You know, this is where overreach in these things is scary and damaging. And hopefully there'll be, you know, good regulation. We need good regulation, not bad regulation in so many spaces. And hopefully the regulators will do a good job. I'm not holding my breath though. Phil, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an honour to meet you. You're a bit of a star in this space, so a little bit fangirling around, but just absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, and hope to get down there to lovely New Zealand again one of these days.